The day they threw me out of the company. Their laughter echoed through that cold conference room like I was nothing more than a joke. Richard's smirk, Monica's cackling, every sound carved itself into my memory. But 4 years later, when I walked back into that same building as the owner of their entire department, their faces froze mid-smile. The silence was deafening. I'd waited for this moment, planned for it, bled for it, and now, standing there in my designer suit, I savored every second of their shock. My name is Emily Carter. And until that brutal Friday afternoon in March, I'd spent 6 years climbing the corporate ladder at Weston & Hale Dynamics, one of Manhattan's most prestigious fintech firms. At 32, I thought I'd finally made it, senior analyst in the strategic development division, corner cubicle with a partial view of the Hudson, and a reputation for turning raw data into gold standard market predictions. The summons came at 3:47 p.m. Monica Gray's assistant barely looked at me as she delivered the message. Conference room A. Now! I should have known something was wrong when I walked in and saw them all there. Richard Hale himself, the department head whose name graced half the building, Monica Gray, my direct supervisor who'd been taking credit for my work since day one, and 3 stone-faced executives from HR. They were arranged like a firing squad, Richard at the center with that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Emily, Richard began, his voice dripping with false concern. We need to discuss your future here. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in corporate assassination. They'd constructed a narrative so twisted it barely resembled reality. My innovative risk assessment model that had saved the company millions. Suddenly, it was reckless endangerment of client assets. The late nights I'd spent fixing Monica's mistakes transformed into inability to meet deadlines. The sexual harassment complaint I'd filed against a senior partner 2 months prior, never mentioned directly, but hanging in the air like smoke. Monica leaned forward, her scarlet nails tapping against the mahogany table. The truth is, Emily, you're just not a culture fit. You're too aggressive. Too difficult to work with. Difficult? I heard my voice crack. I've exceeded every metric, every... Richard's laugh cut through my defense like a blade. It started as a chuckle, then grew into something uglier. Metrics? Emily, this isn't about numbers. It's about knowing your place. That's when Monica joined in, her laugh high and sharp. Did you really think you belonged here? Look around this room. This is what success looks like. And sweetheart, you're not it. The HR representatives remained silent, their faces carefully neutral as my world collapsed. One slid a document across the table, a termination agreement with a pathetic severance that barely covered 2 months' rent, contingent on my silence about any and all matters pertaining to employment at Weston & Hale Dynamics. Sign it, Richard said, no longer bothering to hide his contempt. Security is already waiting outside. My hand shook as I held the pen. 6 years of 70-hour weeks, of sacrificing relationships, of believing that merit mattered, all reduced to this moment. As I signed my name, Richard made a joke about maybe finding work more suitable to my background, and the room erupted in laughter. Not everyone, the HR reps maintained their professional masks, but Richard and Monica laughed like they'd just heard the funniest thing in the world. Security escorted me out like a criminal. No goodbye to colleagues, no collecting personal items, just a cardboard box thrust into my hands containing a few framed photos and a wilted desk plant. As the elevator descended, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. Makeup smeared, eyes red. The woman staring back at me, a stranger. Outside, Manhattan's March wind hit me like a slap. I stood on the sidewalk, holding that pathetic box, watching through the lobby's glass walls as Richard and Monica emerged from the elevator, still laughing. Monica actually pointed at me through the window, saying something that made Richard throw his head back in another burst of mirth. That image burned itself into my memory, them in their $1,000 suits, warm and secure in their kingdom of glass and steel, while I stood in the cold with nothing but a dying plant and the echoes of their laughter. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stared at them until they disappeared into the building's depths and made myself a promise. One day, I would walk back through those doors, and when I did, they would never laugh at anyone again. The first week after Weston and Hale, I maintained the illusion. I woke at 6 a.m., dressed in my business attire, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, crafting the perfect resume. By week 2, the rejection emails started rolling in, form letters that might as well have said, "We called Richard Hale for a reference." By week 3, I stopped pretending everything was fine. My savings evaporated faster than water in Death Valley. Manhattan rent doesn't pause for personal crises. $3,200 a month for a one-bedroom that now felt like a prison. The pathetic severance check bounced after I deposited it. Some administrative error that took 17 phone calls to resolve. When it finally cleared, it was $3,000 less than promised. Post-tax and mysterious deductions. By month 2, I lost the apartment. The landlord's eviction notice came with the same corporate coldness I'd experienced in Conference Room A. I sold everything, the designer clothes I'd bought to fit in, the jewelry I'd saved for, even my grandmother's pearl necklace. Each transaction chipped away at who I thought I was, until I stood in an empty apartment with 2 suitcases and nowhere to go. The studio in Queens was a cruel joke. $900 a month for 200 square feet of stained carpet and rattling pipes. The window faced a brick wall, and the radiator either screamed like a banshee or gave no heat at all. I took 3 part-time jobs, morning shifts at a coffee shop where former colleagues pretended not to recognize me, evening data entry for a sketchy startup, and weekend cleaning offices, including in the cruelest twist of fate. A building 2 blocks from Weston and Hale. At night, I'd lie on the salvaged mattress on the floor, staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like a map of nowhere. Richard's laugh would echo in the darkness. Monica's voice repeating, "You're not it," like a broken record. Sometimes I'd wake at 3 a.m., gasping, dreaming I was back in Conference Room A. Except this time I had the perfect response, the crushing comeback that would wipe those smiles off their faces. But I'd open my eyes to the same stained ceiling, the same nowhere map, the same nothing. The coffee shop was the worst. One morning, a group from Weston and Hale came in, not Richard or Monica, but people I'd worked with. People who'd smiled at me in hallways and asked about my weekend. They ordered their lattes and Americanos. And when I handed them their drinks, one of them, Janet from compliance, looked right through me like I was furniture. As they left, I heard her whisper to another, "Isn't that?" followed by suppressed laughter. I broke that night. Not dramatically. Poverty doesn't allow for dramatic gestures. I sat on the floor of that roach-infested studio, eating instant ramen for the 4th night straight, and cried until I couldn't breathe. The kind of crying that comes from your stomach, that leaves you empty and hollow and wondering if this is it. If this is all you'll ever be. A cautionary tale whispered in corporate hallways. My phone screen was cracked from when I dropped it running between jobs. But I could still see my LinkedIn profile, the professional photo from Better Days mocking me with its confident smile. 250 connections, and not one had reached out. My last post about exciting new opportunities ahead had 3 likes. All from recruiters who'd ghosted me within days. The lowest point came on a Thursday night in month 3. I'd just finished cleaning the offices at 2 a.m., my hands raw from industrial cleaners. When I passed a mirror in the lobby, the woman looking back was gaunt, her eyes hollow, wearing a janitor's uniform that hung loose on a frame that had lost 20 pounds. I didn't recognize her. This wasn't Emily Carter, senior analyst. This was nobody. This was exactly what Richard and Monica had said I was. I stood there for 15 minutes, just staring, remembering Monica's words. Look around this room. This is what success looks like. Now I knew what failure looked like. It was a ghost in a janitor's uniform, haunting buildings where she used to matter. But in that reflection, in those hollow eyes, something else stared back. Not hope. I was too far gone for hope. It was rage, Pure, crystallized rage. They hadn't just taken my job, they'd tried to erase me, to laugh me into nothing. And for 3 months, they'd been succeeding. I walked home through empty Queens streets, past shuttered bodegas and graffitied walls, my footsteps echoing off concrete. When I reached my studio, I didn't collapse on the mattress. I sat at my laptop, its dim screen the only light, and typed 2 words into Google: Startup Accelerators. They thought they'd buried me. They were wrong. They'd planted me. And seeds grow best in darkness. The Tech Forward Accelerator operated out of a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. The kind of place that wore its industrial past like a badge of honor. Exposed pipes, concrete floors, and motivational graffiti that read, "Fail faster." I'd applied on a desperate whim with nothing but a half-formed idea about transparent financial analytics. They accepted me, probably because my application fee was one of only 12 that cleared that month. The first session was a Tuesday evening in April. I arrived straight from my coffee shop shift, still smelling like espresso and failure, to find myself surrounded by 20-somethings in Supreme hoodies talking about disrupting the paradigm. I almost left. Then I saw him, Marcus Lang, sitting alone in the corner, mid-40s, wearing a suit that had seen better days, reading actual printed financial reports while everyone else stared at MacBooks. I knew his name from the business pages. 5 years ago, he'd run a successful hedge fund until Weston & Hale orchestrated a hostile takeover of his biggest holding, crushing his firm in the process. The financial press had called it brilliant strategic maneuvering. Marcus had called it corporate murder. "You're Emily Carter," he said when I approached, not a question. "I remember your risk assessment model. We tried to hire you 3 years ago." "I never got the offer," I replied. "No," he said, studying me with tired eyes. "Richard Hale made sure of that." We talked through the entire session, ignoring the 23-year-old instructor explaining lean startup methodology. Marcus had spent 2 years investigating Weston & Hale's practices, the hidden fees, the algorithmic manipulation, the systematic destruction of smaller firms. He had data, mountains of it, but no platform to expose it. "I have the platform idea," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "Financial analytics that can't be manipulated, real-time, transparent, accessible to everyone from day traders to institutional investors. Level the playing field." Marcus leaned back, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "You want to build what they fear most: transparency." We shook hands in that warehouse, surrounded by kids pitching apps for rating pizza. And Navara Analytics was born. Marcus brought more than expertise. He brought capital. Not much, $50,000 he'd hidden from creditors, but enough to quit 2 of my 3 jobs and focus. We worked out of my Queens studio at first, Marcus taking the subway from his own downsized life in Jersey. 2 failures building something from spite and brilliance. The code came naturally. All those nights I'd spent at Weston & Hale, building models they claimed were too complex, now served a different master. I built algorithms that could detect the patterns I'd once been forced to hide, the micro-manipulations, the hidden correlations, the systematic advantages large firms use to crush smaller players. By month 2 of development, we had a prototype. By month 3, a beta version that caught irregularities in trading patterns that the SEC had missed. Marcus used his old connections, the few who still took his calls, to get us in front of 3 small investment firms. 2 laughed. 1 listened. "This could change everything," Sarah Winters from Apex Investments said, staring at our demonstration. We'd just exposed how her competitors had been manipulating after-hours trading data. "How soon can you scale?" "With proper funding, 3 months." I lied. It would take 6, minimum. But I'd learned that confidence was half the game. She wrote us a check for $200,000 on the spot. The night after that first investment cleared, I stood in my Queens studio, which now served as Navara's unofficial headquarters, and allowed myself one moment of pure triumph. Not celebration, not yet, but acknowledgement that I was no longer falling. I was climbing. Marcus brought coffee the next morning, real coffee, not the bitter stuff I'd been drinking for months. You know they'll hear about this eventually, he said. Richard, Monica, all of them. I'm counting on it, I replied, pulling up our development timeline. But by the time they realize what we're building, it'll be too late to stop us. We hired 2 developers, kids fresh from boot camp, hungry and brilliant and cheap. The studio became a war room. Whiteboards covering every wall, equations and strategies mapped out like battle plans. I stopped seeing the water stains on the ceiling. Now I saw financial models, market patterns, the architecture of revenge. Some nights, when the code blurred together and exhaustion made my hands shake, I'd remember Monica's laughter, Richard's sneer, the cold walk from their building with that pathetic box. Those memories became fuel. Every line of code was a small rebellion. Every successful test, a tiny victory against the people who'd tried to erase me. Marcus saw it, the rage driving me. One night, after 17 straight hours of coding, he said, "Revenge is a powerful motivator, Emily. But be careful it doesn't consume what you're building." It won't, I promised. But we both knew I was lying. This wasn't just about building something new. This was about destroying the old, about taking everything they'd built on lies and exposing it to the light. The coffee shop manager asked why I was always smiling during my remaining shifts. I couldn't tell her it was because I was building a weapon, disguised as a company, aimed at the heart of everything Richard Hale represented. Instead, I just made the lattes and counted down the days until Novara Analytics would be ready to hunt. The sabotage started subtle. Our servers crashed 3 times in 1 week, always during client demonstrations. The hosting company blamed technical difficulties, but the pattern was too precise, too targeted. Then came the lawyers, cease and desist letters claiming patent violations on algorithms that weren't even patented. Each legal response cost money we didn't have, time we couldn't spare. "They know," Marcus said, holding the 3rd letter from Weston and Hale's legal team. "This has Richard's fingerprints all over it." We lost our first major client that October. Dataflow Inc. had signed a preliminary agreement worth $1.2 million. Enough to keep us running for a year. The next day, their CEO called personally. "I'm sorry, Emily, but we've received information about your instability, mental health concerns, previous performance issues. We can't take the risk." I knew exactly where those concerns had originated. The developers quit the same week, poached by a subsidiary of Weston and Hale with offers triple what we could pay. Our CFO prospect ghosted us after a confidential lunch with Monica Gray. Even our accountant suddenly discovered a conflict of interest. By November, we were hemorrhaging money. The $200,000 was gone, burned through legal fees and server costs and the endless expenses of fighting an enemy with unlimited resources. Marcus mortgaged his condo. I sold my laptop, working solely on an ancient desktop that crashed if I opened too many browser tabs. The breaking point came on a frozen Thursday night. I was alone in the studio. Marcus had flu. Our last intern had quit, and I'd been debugging code for 19 hours straight. The heating had been shut off for non-payment. I could see my breath in the air as I typed, fingers numb when the screen went black, corrupted. 3 months of code, gone. The backup server we couldn't afford had failed the week before. I sat in that freezing studio, surrounded by dead screens and dying dreams, and screamed. Not a movie scream, something primal and broken. The sound of everything collapsing. I grabbed a keyboard and threw it against the wall, keys exploding like shrapnel. Then another. Then I was on my knees, sobbing into my frozen hands, tasting failure like copper in my mouth. That's when I saw it. A printout Marcus had left, buried under scattered papers. An article about Elizabeth Holmes, about Theranos, about how she'd fooled everyone until she couldn't. But highlighted at the bottom was a different story. About Brian Chesky sleeping on air mattresses, nearly bankrupt 3 times before Airbnb succeeded. The difference between failure and success, Marcus had written in the margin, is getting up one more time than you fall. I sat on that freezing floor until dawn, wrapped in a sleeping bag I'd bought at Goodwill, rebuilding the code from memory, line by line, function by function, like rebuilding a house from ashes. My eyes burned, my hands cramped. But Monica's laugh echoed in my head, and I kept typing. Marcus found me there 12 hours later, still coding. "Emily, you need to stop." "No," I said, not looking up. "They want me to stop. That's exactly why I won't." He brought coffee and sat beside me, and together we coded through another night. Two middle-aged failures refusing to fail. The breakthrough came from desperation. With no money for traditional marketing, I started posting our findings on financial forums, using dummy accounts to expose the manipulation patterns our platform detected. Not mentioning Weston and Hale directly, that would bring lawyers, but showing enough that smart traders could connect the dots. The posts went viral in the underground trading community. Suddenly, our beta had 10,000 signups, then 50,000. Independent traders, small firms, everyone who'd been crushed by the big players wanted in. That's when Jin Nakamura called. I knew her reputation. She'd built and sold 3 fintech companies, had "fuck you money," as she elegantly put it. She wanted a demonstration. We met in her Manhattan office, 40 floors up, with a view that made me remember what success looked like. I ran our platform on live market data, showing her patterns invisible to traditional analytics. When I exposed a manipulation scheme happening in real time, one that looked suspiciously like Weston and Hale's signature move, she laughed. "You're not just building analytics," she said. "You're building a weapon against the old guard." "Is that a problem?" I asked. "Problem? It's exactly what this industry needs. I'm in for 5 million. But I have conditions." My heart stopped. "Which are?" "You stop operating out of that Queen's hellhole. You hire real developers, and you stop looking like you haven't slept in a year." She slid a contract across her desk. "You're at war with giants. Emily, start looking like you can win." I signed it with a hand that barely shook. 5 million. Enough to fight back, to scale, to survive. That night, I stood on the Queen's subway platform, waiting for the train, and allowed myself to imagine victory. Not the abstract concept, but the specific moment. Walking back into Weston and Hale, seeing Richard's face, watching Monica's smile falter. A homeless man asked for change. I gave him my last 20, because tomorrow I wouldn't need it. Tomorrow, Novara Analytics would have $5 million. "They tried to bury me," I whispered to the approaching train lights. "They didn't know I was a seed." The war wasn't over. It had just begun. But for the first time since that day in Conference Room A, I believed I could win. The transformation was surgical. Jin's money didn't just buy resources, it bought legitimacy. We moved into a real office in Fitty, 20 floors of glass and ambition, close enough to Weston and Hale that I could see their building from our conference room. Marcus called it psychological warfare. I called it motivation. We hired 12 developers from their competitors, doubled their salaries, and gave them equity. Our CTO came from Goldman Sachs, lured by the promise of building something that mattered. Our marketing director had spent 5 years perfecting guerrilla campaigns against established giants. We weren't a startup anymore. We were an army. The Forbes article changed everything. The Phoenix of FinTech, How Emily Carter is Disrupting the Old Guard. They'd found my story, not all of it, but enough. Former Weston and Hale analyst, forced out under mysterious circumstances, now building the platform that threatened their monopoly. The photo showed me in our new conference room, no longer the ghost in a janitor's uniform, but a CEO in Armani, eyes focused on something beyond the camera. Richard saw it, I know because he called Marcus directly, not knowing we were partners. "Your little friend is playing with fire," Richard said, according to Marcus. "She should remember what happened last time she overreached." "Last time," Marcus replied. "She didn't have 50 million in backing and 3 senators asking why Weston and Hale's trading patterns look suspicious." The click of Richard hanging up was sweet music. Our platform went live in March, exactly 1 year after they'd laughed me out of their building. Within 48 hours, we had 100,000 users. Within a week, Bloomberg was calling. CNBC wanted an interview. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature. Novara Analytics, The Transparency Revolution, Wall Street Fears. I wore red for the CNBC interview, the same shade as Monica's nails that day in conference room A. When they asked about my background, I smiled, practiced, sharp, dangerous. I learned everything I know from the best manipulators in the business, I said. Now I'm using that knowledge to expose them. The host pressed. Are you referring to any firm in particular? I'm referring to any firm that profits from opacity, that builds wealth on information asymmetry, that laughs at smaller players while rigging the game. If that description fits, they should be worried. Monica was watching. Her assistant, now my informant, bought with a better offer, texted me her reaction. She threw her coffee mug at the TV. We started bleeding their clients within 6 months. First, the small accounts they'd neglected, drawn to our lower fees and transparent reporting, then mid-tier firms, tired of being second-class citizens in Weston & Hale's ecosystem. By September, we'd captured 8% of their market share. That's when they made their first real mistake. Richard appeared on Bloomberg, trying to dismiss us. Novara is a temporary disruption, he said, that familiar condescension dripping through the screen. Built on emotion rather than expertise, the market will self-correct. Like it did with your risk assessment models in 2019? The interviewer asked. The ones that nearly caused a pension fund collapse? Richard's face went white. That information wasn't public, except I'd made it public, feeding it to journalists through 3 degrees of separation. I don't know what you're referring to, he stammered, but everyone watching did, because our platform had analyzed the patterns, exposed the cover-up, made it impossible to ignore. Their stock dropped 12% that day. The annual FinTech Summit was in October. 3 years ago, I'd attended as Weston & Hale's representative, standing in Richard's shadow while he took credit for my work. This year, I was the keynote speaker. The universe has a sense of humor. My green room was directly across from theirs. I could hear Richard and Monica through the thin walls, strategizing damage control. When I walked past their door, heading to stage, Monica stepped out. She looked older, stress etched in lines that Botox couldn't hide. Her power suit was impeccable, but her hands shook slightly. Emily, she said, trying for casual superiority but achieving only strained tension. Monica. I didn't slow down. You think you've won something? She called after me. You're still the same nobody we threw out, just with better funding. I stopped, turned, and gave her the smile I'd practiced in mirrors for 2 years. The difference is, Monica, I'm a nobody who knows all your secrets. Every hidden transaction, every manipulated report, every client you've cheated. I learned from the best, remember? Her face went pale beneath her makeup. Enjoy my keynote, I added. I'll be discussing transparency in financial reporting, with specific examples. On stage, in front of 3,000 industry leaders, I systematically dismantled every practice that had made Weston & Hale powerful. Without naming them, lawyers had coached me well. But everyone knew. Each example, each case study, each hypothetical scenario was another nail in their coffin. Richard and Monica sat in the 3rd row, required to attend by their board, forced to watch their protégé become their prosecutor. The old guard tells you complexity is necessary, I said, making direct eye contact with Richard. That opacity protects proprietary advantages, but what they're really protecting is their ability to exploit information asymmetry. At Novara, we believe sunlight isn't just the best disinfectant, it's the future of finance. The applause was thunderous. Richard's face was stone. Monica had disappeared. Backstage, Jin Nakamura raised champagne. You just declared war on half of Wall Street. No, I corrected, accepting the glass. I just won the first battle. The unraveling started with a whistleblower. Someone inside Weston & Hale, I never learned who, leaked internal emails to the SEC. emails discussing how to hide losses using the exact methods our platform had exposed. The investigation began quietly. But in financial circles, secrets don't stay secret. By November, their clients were fleeing like rats from a burning ship. Peterson Global pulled $8 billion. Meridian Trust withdrew their entire portfolio. Every departure was another victory. But I wanted more. I wanted to see the fear in their eyes the way they'd seen it in mine. Marcus showed me the numbers on a gray Tuesday morning. Their strategic development division is hemorrhaging money, down 60% this quarter. My old division, I said, studying the data. The one Richard ruled like a personal kingdom. Not anymore. Word is, the board's considering cutting it loose. Selling it off to stay afloat. I set down my coffee very carefully. Selling. If someone made an offer, yeah. But who'd want that toxic mess? I would. God help me. I would. The office was different now. Paranoia had replaced arrogance. I had someone inside, a junior analyst named David who Richard had humiliated once too often. He sent me videos from company meetings. Richard sweating through presentations. Monica snapping at subordinates. The easy laughter replaced by tense silence. Morale is gone, David reported. Everyone's updating resumes. Monica screamed at an intern yesterday for breathing too loud. Their holiday party was canceled, couldn't afford it, according to David. The same party where, 3 years ago, Richard had given a speech about cutting dead weight while looking directly at the junior staff. Now he was the dead weight. The December board meeting was their last stand. Richard presented a restructuring plan, Monica beside him with charts showing projected recovery. But our platform had already analyzed their real numbers, and I'd made sure certain board members had seen the analysis. The call came through Jin's connections. Weston and Hale was officially putting the strategic development division up for sale. Quietly, desperately, accepting any reasonable offer. How much do we have? I asked Marcus. Liquid? Maybe 30 million. But Emily. That's everything. Every reserve, every credit line. It's enough for a down payment. I'll get the rest. He stared at me. You want to buy them? After everything? I don't want to buy them, I corrected. I want to own them. The financing came together like destiny. Jin introduced me to 3 venture capitalists who'd been burned by Weston and Hale in previous decades. They didn't just want returns, they wanted revenge by proxy. Together, we assembled $70 million in 72 hours. The negotiation was scheduled for December 20th in Conference Room A, the same room where they'd destroyed me. I insisted on it, and they were too desperate to argue. I arrived 15 minutes early, claiming my seat at the head of the table. When Richard walked in and saw me there, he actually stumbled. Monica, behind him, grabbed the doorframe for support. Hello, Richard, I said, voice steady as granite. Monica, please, sit. They sat across from me, in the exact chairs they'd occupied during my termination. The symmetry was deliberate, choreographed, perfect. This is a joke, Richard said, but his voice cracked. The board can't seriously be considering. The board is considering the only viable offer, I interrupted. Unless you have another buyer waiting. Silence. Of course there was no one else. I'd made sure of that. Had Jin's connections whisper warnings to anyone who might bid. Toxic assets, SEC investigations, career suicide. Monica tried next. You don't have the capital. This is just some vendetta. I slid the financing documents across the table, watched her read the numbers, watched her realize it was real. 70 million in committed capital, another 50 in credit lines, more than enough to swallow their entire division. The offer is 40 million, I said. That's generous, considering your real valuations. You'll both be retained as consultants for 6 months, reporting to my management team. Standard transition period. Reporting to you. Richard's face was purple. I'll resign first. No, you won't. I opened my tablet, showing headlines I hadn't released yet. SEC investigation deepens. Criminal charges possible. Weston and Hale executives face personal liability. You need this deal, Richard. It's the only thing keeping you from bankruptcy. Or worse. Monica was crying, trying to hide it, mascara running in thin black streams. The same makeup she'd worn while laughing at me. Why? She whispered. Why do this? I leaned back in the chair, my chair now. You told me to know my place. I finally do. The room was silent except for the air conditioning hum, the same white noise that had surrounded my humiliation. But this time, I owned the silence. I owned the room. I would own them. You have 24 hours to accept, I said, standing. Or I walk. And you can explain to the board why you rejected the only offer that keeps this division alive. I moved toward the door, then stopped, looking back at them. Broken, desperate, everything they'd tried to make me. Oh, and Richard, Monica, welcome to your new reality. I hear it builds character. The door closed on their stunned faces, but I could hear Monica sobbing through the wood. Not laughing anymore, never laughing at anyone again. They accepted the offer at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the deadline. Marcus had the contracts ready, every clause crafted to ensure complete control. The signing was scheduled for December 23rd, my birthday. Though they didn't know that, the Weston and Hale boardroom had never felt smaller. Richard's hands shook as he signed his name, each signature transferring another piece of his empire to me. Monica couldn't look up from the documents. Her usual perfect posture collapsed into defeat. Congratulations, their CFO said, his tone professional, but his eyes showing something like respect. Novara Analytics now owns the Strategic Development Division, including all assets, client contracts, and intellectual property. And employees, I added, looking directly at Richard and Monica. Don't forget the employees. The transition meeting was scheduled for January 2nd. I spent New Year's Eve in my new office, Richard's old office, reviewing every file, every contract, every secret he'd thought was buried. The view was spectacular, 42 floors of supremacy. The same windows he'd stood before while deciding who to destroy. When the senior staff assembled that first Monday, I wore the same black suit I dreamed of wearing when I had nothing. Richard and Monica sat in the back row, as required by their consulting contracts. The room was thick with tension, everyone wondering if they'd survive the acquisition. I know you're all concerned about your futures, I began, making eye contact with each person who'd watched my humiliation and done nothing. Let me be clear, everyone who performs with integrity and transparency will thrive here. Those who don't. I paused, letting my gaze rest on Richard and Monica. Will find themselves exploring other opportunities. The first week, I had Richard review every decision he'd made in the last 5 years, explaining each manipulation, each hidden fee, each destroyed career. He sat in a cubicle, no office for consultants, typing reports while his former subordinates walked past, pretending not to stare. Monica's assignment was worse, documenting every instance where she'd taken credit for others' work. The list ran to 43 pages. I made her present it to the entire team, watching her admit to years of intellectual theft while her victims sat in judgment. This is sadistic, Richard said during our third week, summoned to my office, his former office, for a performance review. This is accountability, I corrected, something you never learned. He stood to leave, then turned back. Was it worth it? All this hatred, all this planning, just to humiliate us? I looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time since that day in conference room A. He was smaller somehow, diminished, the kind of hollow that comes from losing everything you'd built on others' backs. You laughed, I said simply. When you destroyed my life, you laughed. The transformation of the division was systematic. Every toxic practice Richard had instituted was exposed and eliminated. The hidden fees became transparent. The manipulated data was corrected and published. Clients who'd been cheated received compensation from Richard and Monica's severance packages, severance they'd now never see. Week 5 brought the media attention. Poetic justice on Wall Street ran in the Times. The revenge of Emily Carter made the journal's front page, The story of the discarded analyst who'd returned to own her tormentors became legend in financial circles. That's when Monica broke. She came to my office uninvited, security trailing behind her. "Please," she said, "mascara running again. But this time without designer tissues to clean it. I can't do this anymore. The humiliation, the way everyone looks at me, just let me go." "The way everyone looked at me," I asked. "When you laughed while security escorted me out?" She collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. We were wrong. Sorry doesn't rebuild the life you destroyed. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I went hungry because of your lies." "Then what do you want?" she screamed. "What will make this stop?" I walked to the window, looking out at the city that had once crushed me. "I want you to finish your contract. Every humiliating day of it, I want you to feel what I felt. Except, you'll do it knowing you deserve it." The final board meeting was February 15th. Richard and Monica's consulting period was ending, and they needed to present their transition reports. The board members who'd approved my acquisition sat in judgment as Richard detailed his own failures. Monica admitted her incompetence, and both recommended their own termination. "Any final words?" the board chairman asked. Richard looked at me, something almost like respect in his broken eyes. "Emily Carter is the most capable executive this division has ever had. We were fools not to see it." Monica just shook her head, unable to speak. When they left, escorted by the same security who'd removed me 3 years ago, I stood by the window, watching them exit onto the street. No boxes this time, nothing to carry but their shame. They stood on the sidewalk, looking lost, looking up at the building that no longer welcomed them. I didn't laugh. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. The signing ceremony was scheduled for February 28th, exactly 4 years since my termination. The entire financial press was invited. This wasn't just a business transaction anymore, it was Wall Street theater. I chose Conference Room A again, because some circles demand to be closed where they began. I arrived early, standing where Richard once stood, watching the city wake up through the same windows that had witnessed my destruction. The ghost of that broken woman with her pathetic box was gone. In her place stood someone Richard and Monica had created but never imagined. Their worst nightmare dressed in Valentino. They entered together, diminished and gray, flanked by lawyers who looked like pallbearers. The room filled with reporters, board members, and employees who'd worked under their reign of terror. Everyone wanted to witness the final act. Richard's signature hand trembled as he signed the permanent transfer documents. Each page turned was another nail in the coffin of his legacy. Monica signed next, tears falling onto the papers, smudging ink that sealed their fate. "The acquisition is complete," the lead attorney announced. "Novara Analytics now fully owns and operates what was formerly the Strategic Development Division of Weston and Hale Dynamics." Cameras flashed. Richard stood to leave, but I raised my hand. "One moment," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "There's something I need to say." Richard and Monica froze, probably expecting one final humiliation. The room held its breath. 4 years ago in this room, you both laughed at me. You found my destruction amusing, my pain entertaining. You thought you were burying me. I paused, meeting their eyes. You were right about one thing. You did bury the person I was. But something else grew from that grave. Something you never saw coming. Monica's face crumbled. Richard's jaw clenched. "I want to thank you," I continued, and watched confusion ripple through the room. "Your cruelty taught me strength. Your mockery taught me patience. Your attempt to erase me taught me how to become undeniable. Every laugh, every sneer, every humiliation, they were all fuel. So thank you for the motivation. Thank you for the rage that built an empire." The room was tomb silent. Richard's face had gone white, understanding finally dawning. He hadn't just lost his company, he'd created his own destroyer. "But here's the difference between us," I said, walking toward them. "I'm not going to laugh. I'm not going to mock you as you leave, because I'm not you. Success isn't about crushing those beneath you. It's about lifting yourself above what tried to crush you. I extended my hand to Richard. He stared at it like it might bite, then slowly, he shook it. His grip was weak, defeated. Monica couldn't manage even that. Just nodded and turned away. Security will escort you out, I said quietly. Good luck with your future endeavors. They walked toward the door, two broken figures who'd once stood as titans. At the threshold, Richard turned back. For what it's worth, he said, voice barely audible. You're right. We created you. And you became everything we never had the vision to be. Then they were gone, swallowed by the elevator, erased from the building they'd once ruled. The room erupted in camera flashes and questions. But I wasn't listening. I walked to the window, looking down at the street 42 floors below. There they were, two small figures emerging into the afternoon sun, standing exactly where I'd stood 4 years ago. But unlike me, they had no cardboard boxes. They'd lost too much to carry. Monica looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun. And for a moment, our eyes met through glass and distance. Then she turned away, and they both disappeared into the anonymous crowd of Manhattan, becoming nobody, becoming nothing, becoming what they'd tried to make me. Marcus appeared beside me, champagne in hand. How does it feel? I thought about it, really thought about it. The rage that had fueled me for 4 years was still there, but quieter now, satisfied. The hollow place they'd carved out with their laughter was filled with something else. Not joy exactly, but completion. It feels like the end of a story, I said, accepting the champagne. And the beginning of something better. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the city gold. The same light that had mocked me 4 years ago now celebrating my victory. But I didn't smile. Victory, I'd learned, doesn't require laughter. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming something so far beyond them that they become footnotes in your success story. I raised my glass to the window, to the ghost of who I'd been, to Richard and Monica somewhere below, becoming memories. The best revenge, I said quietly, is a life well lived, and mine has just begun. The champagne was perfect, cold, expensive, everything I couldn't afford when they'd laughed at me, but their laughter had stopped. Forever. And that silence, that was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Thank you for listening to this story of revenge, redemption, and the price of underestimating someone you've wronged. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to know. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Emily's position? Your comments and perspectives make these stories come alive. Until next time, remember, they can knock you down, but only you decide if you stay down.